The impossible morning. Picture this, November 25th, 1177 AD. The coastal road near the fortress of Montessard, just 25 miles from Jerusalem. The sun rises over the Judean hills, casting long shadows across a landscape that has witnessed the rise and fall of empires since the dawn of recorded history. A 16-year-old boy, his body ravaged by leprosy, his face already beginning to show the horrific deterioration of that incurable medieval curse, sits astride his warhorse, staring down at an army that stretches to the horizon like a dark ocean. King Baldwin IV of Jerusalem, the Leper King, commands fewer than 500 mounted knights. Behind them, perhaps 2,000 infantry, exhausted, poorly supplied, many still recovering from previous campaigns. They are the last military force standing between Saladin's invasion and the complete annihilation of the Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem. Across the valley, Sultan Saladin ibn Ayyub commands 26,000 battle-hardened warriors, 52 times more soldiers than Baldwin can muster. His army includes the elite Mamluks of Egypt, the fierce Turkish cavalry from Aleppo and Damascus, Bedouin scouts who know every goat path and water source in the region, and thousands of infantry carrying the black banners of jihad. They've already burned Ramla and Lydda to ashes. Jerusalem, the holiest city in Christendom, the crown jewel of the Crusader states, lies defenseless, just one day's march away. The mathematical reality is brutal. This isn't just an underdog story. This is a suicide mission masquerading as a battle. One teenage king with a terminal illness, facing the most brilliant military mind in the Islamic world, outnumbered 50 to 1, with no reinforcements, no escape route, and no rational hope of victory. What happens next will be remembered for 8 centuries as one of history's most inexplicable military miracles. A battle so improbable that chroniclers on both sides struggled to explain it without invoking divine intervention. The chess game of empires. To understand the impossibility of Montessard, you need to understand the chess game that led to this moment. The year 1177 represents a critical inflection point in the century-long struggle between Crusader Christianity and resurgent Islam for control of the Levant. Saladin, at 40 years old, stands at the peak of his powers. Born Yusuf ibn Ayyub in Tikrit, he has spent the last decade consolidating power across the fractured Islamic world. He has overthrown the decadent Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt, united Syria under his banner, and forged the scattered emirates and sultanates into something the Crusaders haven't faced since the First Crusade, a unified Islamic front. His propaganda is brilliant. He positions himself as the second coming of Zengi and Nur ad-Din, the warrior sultan who will finally drive the Frankish infidels into the sea and restore Muslim honor after 80 years of humiliation. But Saladin's strategic genius goes beyond military conquest. He understands that the Crusader states survive on a knife's-edge tiny European enclaves surrounded by hostile territory, dependent on a trickle of reinforcements from across the Mediterranean, perpetually one disastrous battle away from extinction. He doesn't need to conquer every castle. He just needs to destroy their field army once, take Jerusalem, and watch the psychological and political collapse follow. The Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem in 1177 is a brittle shell hiding internal rot. King Baldwin IV ascended to the throne at 13, already knowing he carried leprosy, a disease medieval medicine considered a living death sentence. His father, King Amalric, had died suddenly, leaving the kingdom to a boy whose own body was betraying him. Baldwin's hands are beginning to lose sensation. His face bears the first marks of the disease that will, within a decade, reduce him to a blind, disfigured phantom who must be carried into battle on a litter because he can no longer ride. Yet here's what the history books often miss. Baldwin possesses one of the sharpest strategic minds of the medieval period. Taught by William of Tyre, the greatest scholar and historian in the Latin East, Baldwin understands military theory, castle architecture, siege warfare, diplomacy, and the delicate balance of power that keeps his fragile kingdom alive. He knows that his leprosy makes him unmarriageable, that he will produce no heirs, that his kingdom's future is as doomed as his body. This knowledge liberates him. He has nothing to lose and everything to prove. The immediate trigger for Montessard begins in October 1177, when Saladin launches his invasion from Egypt with the largest army he has yet assembled. His plan is elegant and ruthless: bypass the heavily fortified coastal castles, move rapidly up the interior roads, and strike Jerusalem before the Crusaders can concentrate their scattered forces. It's the medieval equivalent of a blitzkrieg: speed and shock overwhelming defensive preparation. Baldwin, based in Jerusalem with his small royal guard, faces an impossible calculation. His greatest general, Raymond III of Tripoli, is raiding Syrian territory hundreds of miles to the north with the bulk of the kingdom's military strength. The Templar and Hospitaller fortresses are holding their garrisons in reserve, unsure where Saladin will strike. If Baldwin waits for reinforcements to gather, Jerusalem will fall. If he marches out with what he has, he leads his knights to certain destruction. The king's advisors plead with him to retreat into Jerusalem's walls, to wait, to pray for reinforcements. Every military textbook screams that confronting Saladin in the open field is suicide. The arithmetic of annihilation. Let's understand the stark mathematics of medieval warfare to appreciate the absurdity of what Baldwin is contemplating. 500 mounted knights against 26,000 warriors isn't just unfavorable odds, it violates every principle of medieval combat doctrine. A mounted knight in 1177 represents the medieval world's equivalent of a main battle tank. These aren't the chivalrous figures of later romance, they're heavily armored killing machines. Each knight wears a full suit of chainmail weighing 40 to 50 pounds, a great helm protecting the head, and carries a 12-foot lance, a sword, and often a mace or warhammer. Their warhorses, destriers bred specifically for combat, are massive animals trained to bite, kick, and trample enemy infantry. In a charge, a formation of mounted knights delivers psychological and kinetic shock comparable to modern artillery. But here's the critical limitation: a cavalry charge is like a thunderbolt, devastating but brief. Once the initial impact dissipates, once the formation breaks up in melee, the math shifts dramatically. A single knight, surrounded by infantry, becomes vulnerable. The horse tires. The armor becomes a liability in the Mediterranean heat. Most critically, 500 knights cannot maintain a continuous front against 26,000 enemies. They'll be surrounded, isolated, and cut down in small groups. Saladin's army presents multiple layers of threat. His Mamluk cavalry, slave soldiers trained from childhood in mounted archery and swordsmanship, are individually nearly as skilled as Crusader knights. His Turkish horse archers employ the devastating nomadic tactics that have terrorized settled civilizations for millennia: ride in, release storms of arrows from composite bows, retreat before the enemy can close, repeat until the enemy formation dissolves. His infantry includes thousands of soldiers armed with spears, swords, and the psychological certainty that they fight a holy war blessed by Allah. Most devastating, Saladin possesses complete intelligence superiority. His Bedouin scouts have mapped every Crusader movement. He knows exactly how weak Baldwin's force is. He knows Raymond's army is far to the north. He knows the Templars are scattered in their fortresses. Saladin has deliberately chosen this moment because the mathematical odds guarantee victory. Baldwin's strategic situation on November 24, 1177, the day before the battle, looks like this. Saladin's main force is marching carelessly up the coast road, spread out over miles in a loose advance formation. They've already sacked several towns. The soldiers are loaded down with plunder, gold, silver, slaves, livestock. Saladin himself is so confident of victory that he's sent a significant portion of his army ahead to begin the siege of Jerusalem, while the main force follows at a leisurely pace. This is the microscopic window of vulnerability that Baldwin's genius perceives. Saladin's army, drunk on easy victories, is strung out and disorganized. They're not expecting battle. They think Baldwin is cowering in Jerusalem. And it's an astronomical if, Baldwin can achieve complete tactical surprise and strike Saladin's center before the army can form battle lines, he might. What? Delay the inevitable, win a brief skirmish before being annihilated. The king makes his decision with the cold calculation of someone who knows he's already dead. He will march out of Jerusalem with every knight he can muster, link up with the Templar fortress at Gaza that holds another 80 knights, and stake everything on a single desperate charge. Not to win a conventional battle, that's impossible, but to strike Saladin's headquarters, kill or scatter the command structure, and shatter the psychological momentum of the invasion. It's not a battle plan. It's a martyrdom operation with a slim chance of taking the enemy down with you. The Templar gamble. On November 24th, Baldwin leads his small force at a punishing pace toward Gaza, riding through the night with torches marking their advance. Every mile closer to Saladin's army tightens the knot of fear in the bellies of his knights. They know the odds. They've said their final prayers, confessed their sins, and made peace with death. At Gaza, they meet Odo de Saint-Amand, the Grand Master of the Knights Templar, and 80 Templar knights, warrior monks who have taken vows of poverty, chastity, and perpetual war against Islam. The Templars represent medieval military culture at its most extreme. They believe death in battle against Muslims guarantees immediate entry into paradise. They are forbidden to retreat unless outnumbered more than 3-1. Facing 26,000 enemies with 580 total knights, they're technically within their rules of engagement, barely. Odo looks at the 16-year-old Leper King and sees something that transcends rational calculation. Baldwin isn't just a dying boy playing soldier. He's achieved a kind of crystalline clarity that comes from having absolutely nothing to lose. The Grand Master makes a decision that will echo through Templar history. He places his order's full authority behind Baldwin's suicidal plan. Together, they refine the strategy. Scouts report that Saladin's army has grown even more dispersed. Advanced units are almost to Iberlin, just 15 miles from Jerusalem. The Sultan's main body is camped near Montessard, off guard, celebrating anticipated victory. If Baldwin's force can approach from the south, using the hills and scrubland as cover, they might achieve complete surprise. The plan violates every military principle. Never attack a numerically superior force. Never charge into the center of an enemy formation. Never commit your entire reserve to a single action. Never stake your kingdom's survival on one roll of the dice. Baldwin orders it anyway. The Ghost March. November 25th, dawn. Baldwin's combined force of approximately 580 knights and 2,000 infantry begins what military historians call the Ghost March, a rapid advance designed to bring them to Saladin's camp undetected. They move through the coastal scrubland, using every depression and ridge to mask their approach. Scouts range ahead, silencing any enemy patrols before they can raise the alarm. Here's what makes this approach possible: Saladin's contempt. His scouts have reported Baldwin's pitiful numbers. The Sultan isn't worried about an attack. He's planning victory celebrations. His army is dispersed across miles of territory, looting villages, foraging, resting. Many soldiers have removed their armor in the Mediterranean heat. Horses graze unsaddled. The command structure is relaxed, confident, already mentally counting the spoils from Jerusalem. Military historians call this victory disease, the psychological condition where an army, convinced of its superiority, stops maintaining tactical discipline. Saladin's forces are exhibiting every symptom. By mid-morning, Baldwin's scouts bring incredible news. The main body of Saladin's army is strung out along the road near Montessard in a marching column, not a battle formation. The Sultan himself is riding near the center with his command group and the sacred black standards of Islam. The elite Mamluks are scattered. The Turkish cavalry is foraging ahead. The infantry is distributed in clumps with no coherent defensive structure. Baldwin sees the opportunity with the tactical clarity of desperation. If his knights can strike directly at Saladin's position, the entire enemy command structure might collapse before the dispersed army can react. It's not guaranteed, nothing is guaranteed, but it transforms the battle from impossible to merely suicidal. The king gathers his commanders for final instructions. Odo de Saint-Amand will lead the Templar knights as the spear tip. Baldwin himself will ride in the second wave with the true cross, the holiest relic in the Crusader kingdom, believed to be fragments of Christ's crucifixion cross. Raynald of Chatillon, the Wolf of Kerak, will command the right wing. Balian of Iberlin, The kingdom's most skilled tactician will take the left. Baldwin delivers no rousing speech. His instructions are coldly practical. We charge through their center. We don't stop to fight. We keep moving towards Saladin's position. If we get separated, each man fights his way to the black banners. If I fall, Odo takes command. If Odo falls, keep charging. We won't get a second chance. Then the 16-year-old leper king, his face already bearing the marks of his disease, does something that will define his legend. He has attendants strap him more tightly to his saddle because his hands are losing sensation and he might not be able to grip the reins during the charge. He draws his sword with hands that can barely feel the hilt and raises it toward the assembled knights. "For God and Jerusalem," Baldwin says quietly, not a shout, not a dramatic oration, just a simple statement of why they're about to ride into the face of an army 50 times their size. The knights repeat it like a prayer, "For God and Jerusalem." The thunder of iron. Noon, November 25th, 1177 AD. The position, approximately 3 miles southeast of Montessard Fortress. Baldwin's force occupies a low ridge overlooking the road where Saladin's army marches in a long, vulnerable column. The Christian army performs its final preparation in near silence. Knights check their girths one last time. Squires hand up lances. Priests move through the ranks offering final blessings. The infantry understands they'll follow after the knights break the initial formation. Their job is to exploit whatever chaos the cavalry creates and prevent the Christian force from being surrounded. At 12:15, Baldwin gives the signal. 600 yards separate the Christian force from Saladin's column. The knights begin their advance at a walk, moving down the ridge in 3 dense wedge formations. The ground is hard-packed dirt and sparse grass, good footing for a charge. The weather is clear, wind minimal, perfect conditions for what they're about to attempt. 400 yards. The advance accelerates to a trot. The formations tighten. Each wedge becomes a steel arrowhead pointed at Saladin's heart. The Templar knights in the lead wedge lower their lances to the attack position, transforming from a cavalry formation into a human avalanche of iron and horseflesh. 300 yards. Saladin's soldiers begin to notice something's wrong. Shouts ripple through the marching column. Men point toward the ridge. Officers scream orders, but confusion reigns. Is this an attack or just a patrol? Why are there Christian knights here? Where did they come from? 200 yards. The trot becomes a canter. The ground trembles. The sound builds, not the chaos of battle, but the rhythmic thunder of 1,200 iron-shod hooves striking earth in synchronized cadence. This is the sound that has broken armies from Tours to Hattin, from Antioch to Arsuf. This is the weapon that made Frankish knights the terror of the medieval world. 100 yards. Full gallop. The wedge formations are moving at nearly 30 miles per hour, each knight's lance couched under his arm, the tip aimed forward, 12 feet of ash wood tipped with steel. The combined momentum of man, armor, horse, and speed transforms each knight into 3/4 of a ton of kinetic energy. Multiply that by 580 knights, and you have a force that will strike Saladin's column with the impact of a modern freight train. 50 yards. Saladin's soldiers finally understand what's happening. It's too late. They scramble for weapons, try to form defensive lines, push forward the spears. But a marching column isn't a battle line. There are gaps, crowds, confusion. The mathematical precision required for infantry to repel cavalry simply doesn't exist. 20 yards. Some of Saladin's soldiers break and run. Others stand their ground with the courage of fatalism. Officers wave swords and scream for their men to hold formation. Impact. The mathematics of destruction. The Templar wedge hits Saladin's column like a meteor strike. Imagine the physics. A warhorse at full gallop, carrying an armored knight with a couched lance, strikes a line of infantry with roughly the same kinetic energy as a modern car crash at 60 miles per hour. The lance doesn't just pierce, it pulverizes. The first 3 ranks of enemy soldiers cease to exist as organized human beings. They're thrown backward, crushed underfoot, impaled, trampled into the dirt. But here's what makes a medieval cavalry charge truly devastating. It's not the initial impact that wins battles. It's the psychological shockwave. The human brain isn't equipped to process the sight of 580 armored giants emerging from a dust cloud at 30 miles per hour. The sound alone, the roar of hooves, the crash of impact, the screaming of horses and men, the splintering of lances, triggers primordial panic responses. Men who have trained for years, who have fought in multiple battles, who intellectually know they should stand and fight, simply break and run. This is what happens to Saladin's column. The Templar wedge doesn't just penetrate the enemy line, it disintegrates it. The front ranks are destroyed by impact. The middle ranks are psychologically shattered and flee. The rear ranks see an impossible sight, Christian knights appearing in the center of the army where no enemy should be, and lose cohesion. Baldwin's second wave, following 30 seconds behind the Templars, strikes into the expanding chaos. The king rides with the true cross carried before him, a golden reliquary that catches the sunlight and becomes a rallying point for every Christian soldier. Medieval warfare is deeply psychological, symbols matter. The sight of their king, the boy whose disease should have left him bedridden, charging into the center of Saladin's army with the holiest relic in Christendom, ignites a fanatic courage in the Crusader knights. They're not fighting a battle anymore. They've entered a collective psychological state that transcends rational calculation, battle rage mixed with religious ecstasy, mixed with the liberation of abandoning all hope of survival. They're already dead men. Everything after this moment is borrowed time, and that makes them the most dangerous soldiers on the battlefield. The third wave, led by Reynold and Balian, strikes the flanks of Saladin's column. The coordinated assault achieves something that should be impossible. For approximately 15 minutes, 580 knights are driving 26,000 soldiers before them. The enemy isn't destroyed. Most of Saladin's army is still intact, but they're scattered, confused, unable to organize a cohesive defense. Then Baldwin's tactical genius shows its full brilliance. Lesser commanders would have stopped to consolidate, to reform lines, to catch their breath. Baldwin keeps his force moving. The knights don't stop to fight individual enemies. They keep pressing forward, carving through the chaos like an arrow aimed at one target, the black banners marking Saladin's command position. The Sultan's flight. Saladin, surrounded by his Mamluk bodyguard about half a mile north of the initial impact point, receives reports that make no military sense. Christian knights have appeared in the center of his army, not a probing raid, a full battle formation, charging directly toward his position. His officers are shouting contradictory numbers, hundreds of knights, thousands of knights, the entire Crusader army. The Sultan's military genius recognizes reality faster than his subordinates. This isn't a conventional battle, it's a decapitation strike. Baldwin isn't trying to defeat the army, he's trying to kill Saladin. And if the Crusader knights reach his position, they will likely succeed. A sultan dead on the battlefield, surrounded by his slaughtered bodyguard, would destroy a decade of political unity in the Islamic world. Different emirs would claim succession. Saladin's grand coalition would fracture. The strategic implications are catastrophic. Saladin makes the hardest decision a military commander can face. He orders retreat, not the army, himself. He wheels his horse and flees eastward with a small group of bodyguards, abandoning the battle to save the cause. It's the correct strategic decision, and it will haunt him for years. Muslim chroniclers will spend decades trying to explain how Saladin, the lion of Islam, fled from a teenage leper. But in that moment, Saladin saves the future at the cost of the present. The Sultan's flight has immediate tactical consequences. The black banners, the symbolic center of the army, are captured by Templar knights who cut through the bodyguard in a frenzy of close-quarters slaughter. The command structure evaporates. Junior officers don't know whether to stand and fight, retreat to regroup, or flee to save themselves. In the absence of clear orders, the ancient instinct of self-preservation takes over. Saladin's magnificent army, which outnumbers the Christians 50-1, fragments into thousands of individual survival decisions. Some units form defensive squares and fight magnificently, repelling multiple charges. Other groups break and scatter into the surrounding countryside. The Turkish cavalry, whose hit-and-run archery should devastate the Christian knights, finds itself unable to organize coordinated attacks in the swirling chaos. Baldwin's knights, meanwhile, are experiencing the kind of military miracle, the killing ground. What follows is not a battle in the conventional sense. It's a massacre made possible by psychological collapse. From early afternoon until sunset, Baldwin's force pursues fragments of Saladin's army across the coastal plain. The Christian infantry, who have been marching hard to keep up with the cavalry, finally reach the battlefield and begin the grim work of finishing wounded enemies and collecting equipment. The numbers become almost abstract. Chroniclers on both sides struggle to count the dead. Muslim sources, trying to minimize the catastrophe, admit to several thousand casualties. Christian sources claim over 20,000 enemy dead, likely an exaggeration born from the haze of combat and the desire to magnify the miracle. Modern historians estimate the actual death toll at somewhere between 8 and 15,000 Muslim soldiers killed, with thousands more wounded, captured, or scattered into the wilderness, where they will die of thirst and exhaustion. Think about what that means. A force of 580 knights and 2,000 infantry has killed or incapacitated nearly half of an army 26,000 strong. The casualty ratio is roughly 25-1. In modern military terms, this is beyond decisive victory, it's approaching annihilation. The Christian casualties are remarkably light, perhaps a few dozen knights killed, a few hundred infantry dead or wounded. Not because Saladin's soldiers didn't fight, many units fought with desperate courage, but because the psychological collapse prevented coordinated resistance. Individual heroism cannot overcome systemic command failure. As the sun sets on November 25th, the battlefield near Montessard presents an apocalyptic tableau. The road is choked with bodies, discarded weapons, abandoned equipment, and dying horses. The air stinks of blood, sweat, and opened bowels. Groups of Christian soldiers move through the carnage, dispatching wounded enemies and collecting the staggering amount of plunder from Saladin's looted baggage train. The material losses are staggering. Saladin's army was carrying the accumulated wealth of several sacked towns: gold, silver, silk, spices, coins, jewelry. All of it falls into Christian hands. The military equipment alone, thousands of swords, spears, bows, arrows, suits of armor, shields, represents wealth equivalent to years of the kingdom's tax revenue. Most valuable of all, hundreds of horses and camels, without which Saladin cannot rapidly rebuild his military power. But the psychological impact dwarfs the material losses. Saladin has been building a narrative for a decade. He is the unifier of Islam, the destined conqueror of Jerusalem, the warrior blessed by Allah to drive out the infidels. That narrative has just been shattered by a 16-year-old boy with leprosy and 500 knights. The story will spread through the Islamic world, how the great sultan fled, how his massive army was routed by a force they outnumbered 50-1, how Allah apparently favored the Christian king. The return to Jerusalem. On November 26th, Baldwin IV enters Jerusalem in triumph. The entire city has turned out to witness the impossible. Their dying boy king has saved the kingdom. The streets are lined with people weeping, praying, shouting thanks to God. The priests carry the true cross through crowds who reach out to touch it, believing they have witnessed genuine divine intervention. Baldwin rides through the celebration with a face that shows no joy. He is in severe pain. The forced march, the battle, and the long hours strapped to a horse saddle have aggravated his leprosy. His hands are swollen and bleeding. His body is beginning the long, inevitable deterioration that will kill him within a decade. But he has achieved something that will define his legend. He has proven that courage and tactical brilliance can overcome impossible odds. He has bought his kingdom another decade of existence. He has transformed himself from a pitiable invalid into one of history's great warrior kings. The victory at Montessard echoes across the medieval world. In Europe, the story becomes legend, the Leper King who defied the greatest Muslim army and won through divine favor. New Crusaders take the cross, inspired by proof that God still performs miracles. The Pope declares Baldwin a living saint. Troubadours compose songs about the battle that will be sung for generations. In the Islamic world, the defeat sparks crisis and recrimination. Saladin faces criticism from rival emirs who question his leadership. He spends years rebuilding his army and his reputation. The psychological wound never fully heals. For the rest of his life, Saladin will be cautious and methodical when facing Crusader armies, remembering the day a teenage leper shattered his invincible host. The long-term strategic consequences reshape the balance of power in the Levant. Saladin does not attempt another major invasion for 3 years, giving the Crusader kingdom time to reinforce, rebuild, and prepare. When he finally does destroy the Crusader field army at Hattin in 1187 and conquers Jerusalem, it happens only after Baldwin IV is dead and the kingdom has fallen into incompetent hands. Montessard doesn't save the Crusader states permanently. That was always impossible, but it buys them another decade of existence. The arithmetic of leadership. Here's what historians often miss about Montessard. It wasn't a miracle in the sense of divine intervention suspending natural laws. It was a perfect storm of tactical genius exploiting enemy overconfidence at the exact moment of maximum vulnerability. Break down the factors. Saladin's army was dispersed in a marching column, maximally vulnerable to attack. The Christians achieved complete tactical surprise. The initial cavalry charge struck with such concentrated force that it shattered command cohesion before defensive measures could organize. The Sultan's flight removed strategic leadership at the critical moment. The psychological shock of being attacked by an army you outnumber 50-1 created mass panic. Remove any one of those factors, and the Christians are annihilated. If Saladin's army is in battle formation, the initial charge fails. If scouts detect the Christian approach, surprise is lost. If Saladin stays on the field, his personal presence might rally the army. If the Muslim soldiers don't panic, their numerical superiority grinds down the knights through attrition. Baldwin's genius lies in recognizing the microscopic window where all these factors aligned and having the courage to stake everything on that moment. Lesser commanders would have waited for better odds. Baldwin understood that better odds were never coming. This was the only chance, and it required accepting suicidal risk. This is the essence of leadership under impossible conditions. The ability to see opportunities that rational analysis says don't exist. And the courage to act when every advisor screams caution. Baldwin was dying, his kingdom was doomed, the odds were mathematically absurd. He attacked anyway, and the universe bent around his will. The lessons that echo across centuries. Montessard teaches principles that transcend medieval warfare. First, numerical superiority means nothing if you cannot bring that superiority to bear in a coordinated fashion. Saladin's 26,000 soldiers might as well have been 26,000 individuals once command cohesion collapsed. An organized small force defeats a disorganized large force almost every time. Second, psychology dominates physical reality in combat. The Christian knights didn't individually kill 25 enemy soldiers each. They broke the enemy's will to fight, and that psychological collapse did most of the killing. Courage and morale are force multipliers that no mathematical model can fully capture. Third, leadership is about making decisions in the absence of certainty. Baldwin didn't know his charge would work. He couldn't know. He made a calculated gamble based on incomplete information and the understanding that inaction guaranteed defeat. That's leadership, acting despite uncertainty because someone must act. Fourth, the terrain of possibility is larger than rationalism suggests. Baldwin's victory shouldn't have been possible according to conventional military analysis. But history is full of these impossible moments. Thermopylae, Cannae, Agincourt, Waterloo, where courage, genius, and circumstance align to shatter mathematical certainty. The lesson is humility. Never assume you know what's possible until the battle is fought. Fifth, individual will can shape history. One teenage boy with a terminal illness, making one desperate decision, altered the course of the Crusades and bought his kingdom another decade. How many other inevitable historical outcomes are actually contingent on individual choices we cannot predict? The Ghost King's legacy. Baldwin IV would reign for another 8 years after Montessard, presiding over his kingdom's slow decline as his body deteriorated. Leprosy gradually robbed him of his fingers, his sight, his face. By his death in 1185 at age 24, he was blind, disfigured, and had to be carried on a litter. But he remained the kingdom's shrewdest political and military mind until the end, outmaneuvering Saladin in several more campaigns through cunning when he no longer possessed strength. The Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem survived until 1291, but it never produced another leader of Baldwin's caliber. When it finally fell, historians looked back at the Leper King as the last figure who could have potentially saved the Crusader enterprise if only his body hadn't betrayed him. Saladin, despite the humiliation of Montessard, eventually achieved his dream of conquering Jerusalem in 1187. But he never forgot the lesson of that November day in 1177, that overconfidence kills armies, that the teenager he dismissed as a dying invalid possessed a military mind as sharp as any in the medieval world. The story of Montessard endures because it speaks to something deeper than military history. It's a story about facing impossible odds with courage and intelligence, about a dying boy who refused to let his body's betrayal define his legacy, about the 580 knights who rode into certain death because their king asked them to and found glory instead. In the 8th centuries, since that battle, countless military academies have studied Montessard as a masterclass in the offensive use of cavalry and the exploitation of enemy overconfidence. Countless historians have debated whether it was genuine divine intervention or merely extraordinary tactical execution. Countless readers have found inspiration in the image of a leper king charging into an army 50 times his size. Perhaps the truest legacy is this: when we face our own impossible odds, when advisors counsel caution and rationality promises defeat, we remember the 16-year-old boy who looked at an army of 26,000, calculated that he would certainly die if he attacked and certainly die if he didn't, and chose to attack anyway.